to take 1 minute and talk to everybody about this incredible building if you have not been here and the work that we do here, and tie it into our healthcare panel for today, and what brought me to Collaboratory. So here, this building is where we gather incredible people in our community to try to drive some change at the root cause of some of the biggest issues that we face in our region. For me, I've spent the last 20 years in healthcare, and that was mainly on the behavioral health side. So I did get the feel-good feeling that many of you might have when a patient comes in and they're in crisis, because our healthcare model is a crisis-driven model, and they may leave a day or sometimes in addiction treatment 30 days later, and you feel good about yourself. I feel like an incredible advocate for human beings. Go me. Inevitably, I send them back into the same environments that they came into me at, the same family structures, the same housing issues, the same unemployment barriers, same exact thing. When I heard about Collaboratory and I got the opportunity to be a leader here, I knew I had to be about it. Here at Collaboratory, we are bringing stakeholders together in the public and private sector. We are bringing experts in the panel you will hear today to talk about how do we go upstream. How do we work together across all of the causes that impact human beings and change it at the system level? Instead of me feeling good about seeing a human in front of me, one human, maybe long after I'm gone, maybe while I'm still here, I will feel good about the fact that communities are actually making an impact and people can live better lives because all of the things are changing around them. That is the work we are doing here. I encourage you to ask more about it. It's not just a beautiful building in downtown. We get mistaken for that. It is a beautiful building in downtown. Hang out here. We'd love to have you. Coffee's great. But the work that's happening here is really where we're making the impact. Okay? Without any further ado, I want to bring up our panelists because I can talk for 10 hours, as you know. Okay, so we have a real treat in store in transformation in health today. There are some experts. They're incredible topics and conversations, and their experience is wonderful. So I hope you really enjoy it. Our first panelist is Kevin Crow. He is an expert on heart, brain coherence, and neuroplasticity. Want to clap individually? We have Dr. Neuwirth, who is the author of Beyond the Walls. Dr. Weiss, who is the Chief Medical Officer for Blue Zones. And our moderator is the incredible Collaboratory consultant and supporter is Kristen Collins.
Thank you kindly. Welcome. In the year 2000, the CDC reported obesity in the United States was at 30.5%. In 2020, the CDC reported that obesity rose to 41.9%. CMS reported in 2022 that the cost of healthcare in the United States rose by 4.1% to $4.5 trillion. That is $13,493 per person in America, 17.3% of our gross domestic product. A number of years ago, the CEO of the Southwest Florida Community Foundation started connecting with the generosity of our community and the gifting that went on to solve for social issues. Yet, the sustainability and development goals of the United Nations was on the decline. And Sarah Owens said, you know what? I'm not sure we're doing it right. And the board of the Southwest Florida Community Foundation had the courage, had the boldness, had the insight to ask that question. So I applaud you for being here today to spend some time maybe reframing the conversation, rethinking the questions we're asking. So here we are at Collaboratory, partnering with the Edison Awards, and thank you both so very much for this opportunity. And if anyone is plugged into an explanation session of what is happening at Collaboratory, you may have heard these statistics. 44% of children in the United States were living below the poverty level, 200% below the poverty level pre-COVID. Imagine what that number is now. In Florida, the number of children living below poverty is 49.5%, basically half of our children in our region, 200% below. In Lee County, 55.9%. The suicide rate in the United States pre-COVID was 13 per 100,000 people. In Florida, that number was 14. And again, in Lee County, 16.9%. 17.9% of the United States was suffering from depression. In Florida, 16.5%, and in Lee County, 22.1%. Today, we're not here to talk about transforming our healthcare system. We don't sit in the seat to make that judgment. Today, we're here to support and inspire you to plugging in to transforming your own health. Sound good? Yeah. Thank you for weathering the storm. Thank you for being here today. It is literally a dream come true to have these three gentlemen on this stage of the Light Bulb series. And they are truly transformers in health. And ironically, all four of us were very involved in healthcare and have chosen to step outside of those walls and to dive deeper into the transformation in health. So I promise you, when you depart here today with your umbrellas and head back out into the floods, our goal is that you are inspired and have actionable steps that you can take to transform your health, because it's through your embodiment, not trying to convince everybody else, but through your embodiment that we as a collective will transform health. So with that, my fellow disruptors, Dr. Weiss, I'd love to start with you, please. If you could give a little bit of your background in healthcare and what inspired you to step outside of healthcare to create transformation in health.
Thank you very much, and particularly thank you to everyone coming here for the interest in this subject. Those statistics we just heard are startling, and even though many of us have heard them before, it's still startling every time we hear them. Also like to thank Studio Plus for having the foresight to realize that there are other ways and better ways to go forward with prevention. So from a personal story, I've been in Southwest Florida since 1977, but basically 46, 47 years now. So, and when I left New York City, I trained at Columbia Presbyterian, Columbia Medical School, and people thought we were crazy. And now Hospital for Special Surgery, where was the last place I trained, is following me down here, but they're 47 years late to the game, basically. So, because that's where I did my rheumatology fellowship, and they said, how could you be going to, but whatever, they finally realized what's happened. So, had a wonderful career, 23 years practicing rheumatology, which is arthritis and related disorders, internal medicine and geriatrics. And for a long time, I was triple board certified and all that. But the one commonality was that I was doing things one at a time, and the people I helped, and I couldn't help everybody, but they kept coming back with the same diseases, the same problems, and it was just a recurrent, it's like there's that old parable about throwing starfish back in the sea. A person's walking on the beach, they throw a star, and somebody comes along and says, well, you're not helping anybody. Well, we're helping one person at a time. But you just wonder, so that's really retail. So then got involved with the NCH healthcare system back in 2000 through about 2019, and had a wonderful experience. And we were very good, and they still are excellent at taking care of open heart surgery and hip replacements and sickness of all types. But it was the same people coming in over and over and over again. People with diabetes, 80% of disease, even with those statistics, is avoidable. 20% just bad luck. We have a war on cancer, basically, which is a wonderful thing. But if we just got rid of the tobacco companies, we'd win the war. Because 90% of lung cancer is tobacco related. 10% is just bad luck. So you can't get rid of the 10% or the 20% that's going to happen, but the rest you can. So as a hospital administrator, I saw the same thing, but just larger scale. And at that point, went out shopping for a different way of doing things. And literally in about 2013, I got my colleagues over here, Megan and folks, talked to the folks in the blue zones, and literally went up to Iowa in the winter. I remember being in northern Iowa. I know it's in the news a lot, not for that reason, but just as in North Iowa, Teachers College. It looked just like FDCU, except everybody had heavy coats on. Nice kids and nice young adults and teachers, and they were in the blue zones, the cafeteria, and they said, well, when we rehab the dorms every summer, which we do, the blue zones dorm needed much less rehab than the other dorms. Interesting. Went out west to the beach cities just south of LA, feet on the ground, and I typically would get there before the scheduled visit and just go around and talk to people and just see what was happening. Sort of a little, not stealth work, but just, and they both had the same great experience. So at that point, we invited the Blue Zones folks to come to Southwest Florida. One quick statistic in the beginning, which was a blockbuster from 2015. So I don't have to start over again.
You can watch the video. I'll send it to you in 10 days.
My wife said you tell the same jokes all the time. So, long story made short, we from 2015 to 2020, third party validation, we added 0.6 of a year of life expectancy for 400,000 folks across the socioeconomic spectrum. Wow, this is when the rest of the country was nosediving with lower life expectancy. If you have one metric you want to see, you want your own life, you want to live a longer, happier, and healthier life, which is actually my personal mission statement, that when we did with the Blue Zones, you had about a 2-hour session where you can find out what your purpose is in life. Basically, give you a set of cards, and it's pretty good. Then you write your one sentence or so. But that's what we wanted to do. So I asked the folks on our board, who wants to spend the night in the hospital? And they loved the hospital, and we all did. But nobody raised and said, well, we'll give you a free colonoscopy. And then, everybody said, oh. But you get the picture. Nobody wants to be in a hospital, even though no matter how good they are and what wonderful things they do. But everybody wants to live a longer, happier, and healthier life. And we can do that. It's not rocket science. It's well-defined, it's very objective, and it's just a question of getting not so much the 20% of the people here right now who already have embraced healthcare, you wouldn't be here, but you can get the other 60% to convert over, to come over. Now that leaves 20% that Darwin is in charge of, and you heard some of the Darwin statistics coming on. So basically, we put Blue Zones in and thrived, and really did what we wanted to do, which was help people live longer, happier, and healthier lives.
Thank you. Oops.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. It was an incredible journey for us here in the region to experience you bringing in the Blue Zones, and we're forever grateful. And I look forward to diving deeper into that conversation. If you'd hand that microphone over to Dr. Neuwirth so everybody can hear the 3/4 of his story from the beginning. Dr. Neuwirth is so much more than his authorship of Beyond the Walls. And I've read it once and now listened to it twice, and I have your words in my essence. So thank you for making the trip down here to be with us. If you would share with our beautiful guests your journey from going from within the hospital walls to being a global leader in transformation of health.
Thanks, Kristen. First of all, let me just say I'm so glad to be here with you all, and really appreciate you being here in this conversation. I think we need more of these conversations in healthcare and in health. So I'm going to just say my traditional career is pretty standard. I studied internal medicine, practiced for over 15 years in 3 different metropolitan cities across the country, including New York and Boston. Left the practice to go into management and then be an executive in large healthcare systems. And so on paper, it looks pretty normal. But the truth is, it's the most bizarre medical career I'm aware of. The moment I stepped into the clinical exam room after I'd been trained, because in training, you're just trying to survive. But the moment I was an attending physician, I was appalled at a number of things. First of all, I was just appalled at how people are treated with such a lack of respect and dignity in our healthcare system, and I was part of it. And I observed it, initially I thought it's just me as I'm observing myself, and then I looked at other physicians, and then I looked across the country, and it was the same. And I thought we need to do something, and literally from the first year of my being a doctor, my mission became to humanize healthcare in this country, and that has stayed with me forever. The second thing I realized, and this is somewhat, I think, similar to Alan, I was, day after day, week after week, year after year, people are coming in and I'm being forced to just, 7 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, just churn through them. And all I could do was, what's your problem? And here's the medication, or here's the referral. And I began to feel really empty inside. I began to feel this is not what I signed up for. I really want to create health, not just solve a manifestation of illness and the sequelae of largely what Alan said could be prevented. And so the job became very, very frustrating on top of it. And so I became, although again on paper you would say, oh, you're a manager, you're a director, you're an executive, you're a chief medical officer, that's what you are. Well, what I was actually a heretic. I was actually innovating silently. I was doing something called human-centered design before most people knew what that was. I was doing video ethnography, literally following my patients with a camera into their homes after they were discharged from a hospital to understand what that experience was, because no one seemed to understand their experience. So I was doing this as I had these titles and these roles. It was sort of a dual existence. And then introducing all kinds of programs through that, again, to humanize healthcare delivery and to really move beyond healthcare to health, and even beyond that to a meaningful life for myself and my patients and my colleagues. And I could say more about that because I think that's really important and pivotal in healthcare. And then about 10 years ago, exactly 10 years ago, 3 things happened to me in succession which completely changed my life, and I had to get off the track I was on. The first was that my mother had a total hip replacement in an amazing hospital in North Jersey where I grew up, and phenomenal doctors trained at Columbia, phenomenal nurses from phenomenal teams, and she didn't leave the hospital alive. And despite the fact that I'm a doctor, my brother's a doctor, my sister works at Kaiser Permanente doing care transformation. Despite that, we couldn't save my mother. And I personally live with that, not only with the loss, but that sense of could I have done something to save her life over the course of many, many weeks while she was suffering in the ICU. And so that happened, and I thought to myself, oh my God. And then I realized, though, this isn't just happening because I've been studying this for years. This isn't just happened to me and my family. We know that every single day, somewhere between 500 to 1,000 families lose a loved one in our healthcare system from preventable, I'm not talking about causes that can't be prevented, preventable causes. And I literally could not let go of that. And a few months after that, my mother's passing, I got a call. I was sitting and writing in my on a Saturday morning in my home office, and I got a text, and it said, "Did you hear about Dr. So-and-so, who was actually my primary care doctor, and someone I worked closely with. He was sort of our chief innovation officer at the time." And that week, after seeing patients from Monday through Friday, he got into his car, went to a park, pulled a gun out of his compartment and shot himself in the head. And again, that wasn't an isolated incident because I knew the statistics and the worsening statistics of how many doctors and nurses take their lives, more than any other profession. And that's not about the individuals. When it gets to be where we are today, where 50, 60% of doctors are burned out and demoralized, that's not the individuals. That's a system that is doing that to them and their patients and their colleagues. And so those things happened, and I was in a meeting a few weeks after my friend committed suicide, and I had this sort of deja vu feeling of, wait a minute, I'm in here with white coats, doctors, and administrators, the suits, and at the time I was a suit. And I thought to myself, oh my God, this is like Groundhog Day. We talked about this problem 3 years ago, and it's the same problem and the same solutions that are being generated. And then I was like feeling a little nauseous about that. And then I realized, oh my God, I was in the same exact meeting 10 years ago in a different city with a different set of suits and white coats in a different system. And in that moment, I snapped. And I just said, I can't do this anymore. And so what was I going to do? And I did something which was unusual. And it was out of pure desperation and pure selfish need. I started to identify people around the country who were divergents, who were positively deviating. It's a method which I didn't realize at the time that I was doing. It's called positive deviance. And I looked for these people who were different but successful. It wasn't just that they were by chance, they were radically transforming healthcare. And I did something strange. I pulled out my phone and I called them up and I said, do you mind if I record our conversation? And I would interview them, in-depth interviews, trying to figure out not only what they were doing, but how they were thinking and who they were as people. I started that 10 years ago. And I recorded these things, and then I would transcribe. It's amazing what the cell phone could do. You literally hit a couple of buttons and you have a transcript of that. And I would sit there and I would study those dialogues. Literally, my wife thought I was going insane. It was sort of like a crazy, beautiful mind. I was sitting there connecting the dots, starting to look for the commonalities, the similarities, the patterns. And two things happened within 2 years. People were calling me up and asking me for these audio files. And finally I said, I can't do this. I can't email audio files every day, all day long. And finally a physician who you may recognize his name, Atul Gawande, called me up. And he said, Zev, I heard about your audio files, these interviews. I'm writing something for the New Yorker. Can you send me your audio files? I just said Atul, whom I knew from Boston remotely. I said, I'm tired of doing this. I'll gladly send them to you, but And he said, well, why don't you launch a podcast? Now this was 8 years ago or 9 years ago. Podcasts were not what they are now. And I stupidly said to Dr. Atul Gawande, I said, what's a podcast? And he reverted into his surgeon mode and he said, look it up, and he hung the phone up on me. The second thing that happened was I tried to write an article, and I'm a terrible writer. And I ended up with about 300 sheets on my desk, and my wife was brilliant. She's a physician and just unbelievably brilliant, infectious disease doctor. She walked in one day and she said, that looks like a book. And I was just like, oh, I can't write an article, but maybe I can write a book. And so my first book, Reframing Healthcare, it was published in 2019. I distilled the patterns. It was almost like a playbook these innovators were using, and it was plain as day. In fact, I was interviewing someone, it was about 2 years into it. I just said, I was so exasperated, I said, oh my God, you're all the same. It was like, and I'm literally saying this to the person I'm interviewing. I said, you're all the same. He said, what are you talking about? I said, it's like someone handed you a playbook that I didn't get. And he turned to me and he said, well, can you write it down? And I said, yes. And so that's what I did. And using examples, and then I continued to interview. I've now had hundreds and hundreds of these interviews. I've posted about 160 on the podcast. And the second book emerged from where the first book was about the how, the second book was the what, and it's basically a 3-part strategy that I distilled from these hundreds and hundreds of real-life interviews with people who are literally doing what the rest of us want our healthcare system to do, which is to transform into a humanizing, healthful force. And I distilled it into a 3-part strategy, which is hard to believe that, and it takes a little bit of arrogance to say that, but I think it is the three-part strategy that the healthcare system has to follow. And I can illustrate it with story after story after story, example after example, not things that will come, things that already exist that most of us are unaware of. Healthcare delivery approaches. I'm working on a third book, which is one of the reasons I'm here, because I'm hoping to meet people and to learn more. People sitting next to me here in particular, but you all as well in the collaboratory. But the third book is not going to be about the how or the what. It's going to be about the why. It's going to be, whereas the first book was about transposition of thinking, the second book was about transforming what we do. The third book, and I didn't know I was writing a trilogy, but the third book, I knew it before I stepped on the stage, but I'm saying, I didn't just make it up. But the third book is about transcendence. And we need to, and in fact, I think the title Beyond the Walls, and we were just talking about this, the title Beyond the Walls is sort of a presaging this notion of, it's not about outside or inside, it's about transcending, getting beyond those walls.
Thank you, Dr. Will. Amazing. We do have a couple copies on the walls outside, so afterwards, if you'd like to purchase and connect, you're welcome to. Transcendence is the ideal segue to Kevin Crowe. And I've been watching Kevin's work now for a few years, and besides being your #1 fan, you are bringing to this conversation support of neuropathways and heart coherence. And I was someone, as Dr. Weiss has already cited, who had chronic disease. Even though I was a vegan triathlete, I found myself having chronic disease with over 100% inflammation. And I couldn't find the reason why I had inflammation as a vegan triathlete. And it was my understanding of my mind-body connection, or lack thereof, that was making me very sick. So what you're bringing to today's conversation is imperative, it's impactful, and it's possibly going to be something new to a lot of people in this room today. So thank you for being here. Can you give a little bit of your history on where you came from and why you stepped into transcendence?
Let me begin like my fellow speakers here did and thank all of you, thank Collaboratory and our sponsors. These conversations haven't been happening as much as they should. And so this for me brought not hope, but faith in the direction that things can be moving and what's been happening in this world. So thank you. I'll share my story and my journey with you. From a story perspective, I had a first career about 10 years in hospitality that led me into healthcare. And in the early 90s, when healthcare was looking at, we need a different way of working with our patients, I brought a guest component to healthcare. And I was the second physician in the country that actually began to talk about patients as guests within the institution. And for the next 20 years, I worked for an organization doing that work and bringing this to the forefront of healthcare, having conversations all across the country around what this looked like. That brought me into some higher ed. So I worked in higher ed with, also in healthcare, College of Nursing. And I began to see some fundamental issues that I hadn't seen previously because I was outside of the context of the four walls of the organization. And then I moved out to California and I took a national position. My work was around teaching the science of gratitude to clinicians, physicians, executives, what that meant for them individually and what it meant for their patients and the families of those patients, and some of the science behind it. And that's when I began, probably in the higher ed space, but then into that next iteration of what I was doing in healthcare, totaling about 30 years, leading me to the science around so much of what was happening within individuals. What wasn't a part of the story was my own personal journey. So I was considered highly functioning, but had a crystal meth addiction. during 20 years, so about 10 years of that time, in that first 20-year period. And what I hadn't figured out for myself was I had gotten into healthcare to make a difference, and suddenly I found myself in that position of having a street-oriented drug that was a part of my everyday life. And so one day I just woke up, I decided I can't do this anymore, and I tried to end my life unsuccessfully. And I figured if I couldn't end my life, I had to change my life. And that put me on a path to where I am today, which is outside of the four walls, outside of healthcare. I discovered HeartMath Institute, and I began to investigate what heart coherence looked like and what that meant. At the time, still working in healthcare. Today, not as much. I sit on the executive team of the healthcare division, and I do a lot of training and a lot of work around individuals and their own personal resilience and coherence. I hold sessions on a regular basis to allow people to experience this, and sometimes with healthcare professionals within the organizations. And I discovered the work of Dr. Joe Dispenza, who also, from a transformation perspective, had led me into personal transformation. And those two pieces are what I could say that I was successful at not ending my life, but between HeartMath and the work that I discovered there, I was able to change my life. And so today I work as the head of operations for Metamorphosis, which is the research division for the work that we do all across the world. I actually look at the science of transformation and what that means for individuals. And I pull in heart coherence, and we talk about neuroplasticity and brain coherence in relationship to that and what it means from a personal or individual transformation perspective and the power that we have as individuals to make changes within our own health.
I'm thinking that's about drop for today. I told you it's taking a little bit of a different angle. Kevin, thank you. I cannot wait to get into that work. So I have so many questions that are bubbling up inside of me. I want to go to built environment, but I'm going to kind of speed ahead for a minute because all three of you cited purpose. All three of you cited whether directly or indirectly connecting with purpose. And there was a quote that I took out of Beyond the Walls, and it says, instead of asking a patient, what's the matter with you? How about we ask that patient, what matters to you? So thank you, Dr. Nura, for that beautiful ideology. I'd like all three of you, if comfortable, to comment on the role of purpose, the role of gratitude in the journey to better health.
So the source for that question, and it's not just a question, it's actually being deployed across the country in the VA system. So they've been studying whole health for 20 years. And so I've interviewed their clinical and administrative leadership repeatedly about their whole health movement. I have a whole chapter in the book about it. And they were very, very focused. Now, it does include other helpful things, sleep and nutrition and physical activity, relationship. So it encompasses helpful factors, you know, I think all of Blue Zones. But at the heart of it is a sense of purpose and meaning. And what I learned from the discussions with the researchers and clinicians in the whole health deployment, because they're actually deploying it. It's embedded in their electronic medical record system. That question is in their electronic medical record system. And the second question they ask is, there are two questions with their shorthand. What matters to you right now in your life? What's the most important thing to you? And what's one thing you can do to move closer to that? That's the distillation of a much, much larger system. You could actually go online and you could actually see all of this on their website, the Whole Health, the VA, va.gov/whole health. And what they discovered and what they taught me is that there's actually a science around purpose and meaning. Now, we've known this for years. You know, the classic book, Man's Search for Meaning, where this physician, the psychiatrist in World War II in Austria, was interned in a concentration camp in the most horrendous, frightful conditions one could imagine. And through that experience, what he saw was that the people who survived those death camps in Germany in World War II were not the strongest or the brightest or the most clever or the most shrewd or the best looking, none of that. The people who survived were people who could connect to a purpose and hold on to that purpose. Now, since that time, he wasn't the only one who's written about it, but he created a whole logotherapy, a whole therapy school built on purpose and meaning. But since that time, over the past few decades, there's actually been a real science and research on purpose and meaning. It shows that people who can have a sense of purpose, and this doesn't, purpose isn't something that just happens to you. You have to create it, you have to work on it, and you have to maintain it, and you have to live it, right? But people who can do that actually die less. So like if you look at a year out, 2 years out, you see that the people who have purpose and meaning are the people who survive. And despite whatever else is going on in their lives. And so anyway, they took that and they actually created this whole health movement at the VA around it, where they're actually now asking people questions about that. It's, it is something that I've not only studied, and I think this is really important. I'll end with this, but I think it's important not just to read about, talk about, and this maybe we'll get to this issue of health. And one of the things I've learned is you have to live it. And so one of the things that I've done over the past 2 or 3 years, very, very intentionally, and I could give you numerous examples, but in my work and my job, in fact, I just had a session with some coworkers where we literally drafted up, we're gonna have a group purpose here and a sense of meaning. And they were like, where are you coming from? And where I'm coming from is that, for the past 2 years or so, I've thought intentionally on a weekly, if not sometimes daily basis, on what is the purpose of my life, and is what I am doing actually manifesting that or not? Am I being distracted from my purpose, or am I living my purpose and even expanding my purpose? And I think that is probably the single most important thing. I had a CEO, a cardiologist, who was a CEO of a large provider group I worked in Boston, and he was a maniac in terms of physical activity. Didn't matter what meetings were happening, didn't matter where we were across the country, he would make sure he ran or worked out every single day. And one day I just said to him, why? And he said one word: integrity. He said, how can I, as a cardiologist, tell my patients to lose weight, to do physical activity, to take their appropriate medications, to take care of themselves? How can I do that if I'm not living it? Where's the integrity in that? And so I think for me, that's what purpose is about.
Beautiful, thank you. Dr. Weiss.
So purpose, worthwhile work, and make a difference. I've used those 3 phrases with a multitude of people, particularly young people. So in your life, you have to have purpose. The people who do think they can live to be 90 are much more likely to live to be 90. Now, from 90 to 100, you need good genes. You can't change. So far, you can't change your genes. But having that purpose, worthwhile work, and making a difference is mission critical for anyone. And it doesn't matter whether you get paid for your work or not. Volunteers also have purpose, and they live longer and better than everyone else. And your examples just now are the cardiologist, the integrity. That all fits in. And purpose is one of the 9 principles of the beginner's ethics. Yeah, very important one. So,
can you dive a little bit deeper into that? Has anybody here seen the new 4-part series on Netflix about Blue Zones? If you haven't seen it, I would advise you to watch it. It's fantastic. But that was where I was really connecting with the theme of purpose amongst the Blue Zones.
So that's been viewed by the Netflix folks that by 35 million people already, and still there, how will live to be 100. And basically, if you're purposeless, if you're aimless, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. But that's not really what you want to have in your life. But having a goal, having a reasonable reason to get up every day, be engaged, to stay healthy yourself, to spread your health. The other thing is that people who are purposeful hang around other people who are purposeful. So if we went through this room right now and anonymously or everybody write down the purpose, we're at 100%, okay? I just have that feeling. The purposeless people sadly get distracted and have these tragedies, whether the three horrible things that are happening in America today, be it drug addiction, the opioid crisis, suicide crisis, and alcoholism. Those typically at times in their lives, and unfortunately they're all rehabilitatable, but that's really where we should be moving long term, along with other things. And the other thing about purpose is you have to have some work-life balance also. So it's okay to relax. It's wonderful to be with your family. So some of the other Blue Zones principles that are very important are having friends. It used to be in this country people had about more than 3 friends. We're now down to 1.5 friends. COVID had a horrible effect on everyone, but particularly the younger children who didn't get to socialize for the period of time, for a couple of years when they were in elementary school or middle school. And now that is very disabling, and no one knows quite yet what the results of that epidemic are going to be. Short term, we know the mortality and all the medical stuff, but the psychological effect on various times of development. I'm told that children's, infants and 1- and 2-year-olds, their speaking ability, their verbal ability is not the same as it has been in other generations because of the COVID and the menacing and so on. I'm not an expert on that, but there are going to be some. So having friends is very important. Socialization, loneliness is as bad as diabetes in terms of mortality. The other thing that's very important is faith-based organizations. If you belong to a faith-based organization, any faith, you live 4 to 14 years longer than otherwise. So, and then the last is family. Getting together with family, more than just the holidays, getting a call, at this stage of my life, I get a call from one of my adult children, about rapid attention, just to, undivided, because it's just so good to interact with family and do those sorts of things.
I may come at this a little bit differently.
Yeah, I was hoping so.
I used to think that my purpose was being of service, which in hospitality and healthcare really fit well. And then as I had this period in my life where I discovered that every day I woke up depressed, and that depression just carried me through, and the work that I was doing, I was understanding a little bit more around emotional intelligence and my connection to what that depression meant. And from an energy perspective, and we are energy, we're energy, frequency, and vibration. So from an energy perspective, what that meant for me as far as draining on a regular basis. I would get asked the question regularly every 2 weeks, what makes me happy? And I literally would shrug my shoulders, I don't know. But I'm serving, I'm assisting, I'm helping. And so what became, for me, pivotal is when I decided to be in service as opposed to of service. When I became in service, that meant that I was first and foremost looking at myself and what was the energy and the frequency and the vibration that I was going to be that then could have an effect on those around me. And my purpose moved into how is it that every day I can serve? And what does that look like for me? And I discovered joy. I had one instance, I had one example of happiness that I worked with in my path with HeartMath as I began to become first a trainer and then a master trainer. I had a dog, and I'd come home every night from work, and Lucas would meet me in the kitchen. He was a boxer lab. He'd shake his tail. So I decided after, 100 or so days, I would start shaking my tail too. And we listened to Pharrell's Happy, because I couldn't answer the question. And then I realized that was my answer. And so I built from that foundation what it meant for me to experience joy. And with joy, I began to experience other emotional states that were generating more energy at a higher frequency. And things completely transformed into where I am today, where I can literally say I wake up in the morning every day in joy. And I work at it. There's meditation, there's practice, there's other pieces involved in that. But what it's done for me is create a situation where now people are coming to me to have conversations around how are you different? And what is it about what you do that I can do to experience this difference? And so being in service today means even if it's not a good day, it's a day where I can use this demonstration for myself to work toward a higher frequency, to work toward achieving something that will, for myself first and foremost, and then for whoever might be around me in the field. And we can say, there's science around the fact that we generate an electromagnetic field. That field has within it the frequency that we're experiencing at any given moment. Other people will experience that field right now sitting next to each other as we are here. We're generating a field. And so that field can be experienced by all. And the social aspect of that, which I can get into in a little while, the social coherence component of that, will have an effect in a larger scale, beyond the individuals, beyond who you're sitting next to, beyond the room, and actually affect the planet. And we have measurements of that. So there's my answer for you.
Kristen, do you mind if so one of the things, and I just want to give Kristen some real credit here, and we were huddling about you before when you were out of the room, talking about you and how grateful we are for you bringing us together, so thank you. But you did something, when we were prepping for this over the last few weeks, Kristen would ask me questions and I would talk about healthcare, and then Kristen said, no, I want you to talk about health. That's what we're going to focus on, health, not healthcare, health. And, it's kind of crazy, but I think, these conversations have, like you say, the fields, they have impacts on you that you don't understand. So you may have actually helped me change the course of the third book and my kind of focus right now. But, and one of the things Kristen said is I want all of us to leave the room today with at least one or two or three concrete things that we can do individually to be healthy. So I'm going to jump ahead if you don't mind, because I don't want to. I want to be very careful here. So I'm putting this out as something to be just discussed or looked at or whatnot. But I think what you just shared with us is, for me, actually a helpful activity which I have not heard anyone really call out. And I think your story kind of, and so I'm testing it out. It made me think about this, and I don't want to impose, but one of the things, whether it's meditation, and I actually am a big fan of Dr. Dispenza, and I actually do his meditations. I'm a big fan of the Blue Zones that have been following them and working with them for years, actually trying to promote their work and actually trying to live some of the factors. But underneath all of this, there's a helpful activity which I don't think any of us recognize enough. And there are a lot of things that distract us from this healthful activity. And I'm beginning to think it is sort of the channel through which a lot of other things we do actually tries to drive us to. And that helpful activity is listening to yourself. Listening to yourself. And it's, whether, I think whether, when you sit in meditation, and I do, and I hate it. Because I can't go, think about all the distractors. So, and this is another point I just want to share with you, which I'm realizing more and more, that the world around us, the environment around us, does not conspire to help us be healthful. It actually does the opposite. So there are so many things, and it didn't used to be that way. It used to be that we were bored a lot of the time. And that boredom actually allowed us, it forced us to listen to ourselves. If you're doing manual labor, and I've done manual labor in the past, it's mindless work, except for the fact that all you can do is listen to yourself and your own thoughts. It's a meditation. If you have to walk to get to school or to work, it's mindless except for the fact that you have to listen to yourself. If you don't have Facebook, or LinkedIn or TikTok or Instagram, you have to listen to yourself. If you don't have movies on demand 24/7, thousands and thousands of them on a Friday or Saturday or Sunday night, you have to listen to yourself. Even reading, which again, I think so few of us do or have the time to do, even reading forces you to stop and listen to yourself because you're thinking as you're reading, you're in a dialogue with the author. And I think that for me, when we talk about the crisis we have, the drugs and the suicide and the opiates, I think about some of the other issues we have. I think a lot of it is, and I'll say one other thing, I think a lot of it is that we're distracted. We aren't forced anymore. We aren't allowed, we aren't enabled, we aren't empowered to listen to ourselves. And I could say a lot more about listening to yourself, and that's what I'm thinking about more and more. But even, so I'm not a conspiracy theorist in any sense of the word, but you think about it, our industrial society, our consumer-oriented consumption society, the mega corporations don't want you to listen to yourself. Who do they want you to listen to? And again, I'm not casting blame or anything like that. This is what we live in. I'm just observing. And the observation is that if you listen to yourself, you're not listening to the advertisements. And you're not listening to them tell you, you need to buy me, or you need to have this. In fact, Al and I we were talking about this before. Another useless thing that I own, another useless service that I have. And again, the more you listen to yourself, potentially the less you're listening to those advertisements and that consumption. And what does that mean? That means potentially their revenue goes down and their margins go down. So I think that when I say the environment conspires, and I do think that for me the most helpful activity, yes, listening to yourself, but even before that is realizing that I have to actually protect myself. I have to protect myself in this environment where if I was a really, really good subject for my environment, I would be sitting on a couch with a remote control, eating fast food, listening to social media, which sounds like my children, by the way. But and I think the most helpful thing is realizing what we live in. And it is, by the way, why my colleagues here, what they're doing is so important. Blue Zones is a way to cocoon yourself from that environment. Now, I think that meditation is another way to cocoon yourself. It's another way to protect yourself so you can actually do those helpful things. And I think that's, for me, when I think about my life, I think about, I'm not doing Blue Zones personally, but I'm doing those things. I'm creating Blue Zone light, Blue Zone factors in my own life. And I see that in some of my colleagues. I imagine if we went around the room right now, each one of you could give an example of how you're protecting yourself, you're cocooning yourself, you're forcing yourself to be healthful in probably a number of different ways.
Love that reflection. And what you're both speaking to is that search for meaning or joy or satiation from outside of yourself. And what you're citing is it's actually the connection within that we're so distracted from. We can't be in the present moment. We can't feel the emotions that come up in that present moment. We dissociate or distract from them. So I love this, and I want to hear from you, Dr. Weiss, and then I want to get over to you, Kevin, in reference to coherence and what that effect has on your health, because that was why I was so sick, was because I was completely out of coherence. But first, Dr. Weiss.
So The Chaos Machine, it's a good book, and it just talks about how we get addicted to the screen. So you wonder what's going to happen to the newest generation, kids today. Their parents are busy, they give them a screen. You know the rest of the story. So let's just see how folks grow up that way.
Yeah, good point.
There's a lot in the space of coherence. Some research has been done in this arena. If you take two individuals and you put them on a platform like this and you have them look at a mountain and you have them estimate the degree or the pitch that climb or the incline is going to be, you have them do that estimation first, then you put a backpack on them that's about 25 pounds, and you have them estimate it again, and oftentimes that pitch increases based on what they're observing. If you have them do that a third time with someone that they have a relationship with, a partner, a colleague, a close friend, 79% of the time, the incline will decrease below the first estimate. The power of social coherence and relationship is such that we view the challenges ahead of us from a perspective of achievable with less difficulty when we're doing so together. And to your point, what's been happening is that based on the events that we've experienced over the last 5+ years, we've become less social. We've become less engaged with each other. The 1.5 friends, in some cases, is indeed in that, based on where people were in their experience of relationship and what it is today. Social coherence, because we have an opportunity together to have shared values and shared space, increases one's ability, I chose the word faith earlier, to have faith in what an outcome may potentially be. So from the perspective of taking a look at how we engage with others, and I mentioned frequency. From a frequency perspective, one of the highest frequencies that we can embody is authenticity. And when we are authentic with those around us, when we're vulnerable, we allow ourselves to be in integrity in those relationships, it exponentially increases our ability to go beyond the challenges and actually begin to create in ways that we couldn't previously foresee, which is one of the reasons why I think this institution, Collaboratory, is so special, because I don't think that that exists in a lot of places. And it may not be the exact words, but it's part of what's entwined in what's happening here.
Yes. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, Kevin. And this is a celebration and an offering and an invitation to come together, to convene, to get to that root of our entangled social issues. So thank you for that. That was a beautiful reflection. Built environment, how does that affect our health? Dr. Royce, if you'll comment on that, I think you're one of the experts in built environment and how that affects us individually and as a society.
Where you live, where you live matters. You will take the same, people who smoke will aggregate with other people who smoke. People who are overweight, the same. People who exercise, to see the same people in the gym or on the road running or walking their dogs and so on. So your built environment, if it nudges you in the right direction to move naturally, walking works just great. You don't have to be anything more than that, but walking almost every day, 20 minutes at a reasonable pace, that alone can satisfy the need for your body to be mobilized and be used. Now, if you live in an area that is dangerous to walk in, I'm thinking of some areas in downtown Fort Worth, Texas, there was a lot of stranger danger. And so they had a food desert and you couldn't get to the grocery store. They started to, it's a real problem. So Blue Zones folks went there, got the local high school kids to paint over the graffiti and put some nice appropriate things. Helped the fellow who owned the store was Ramey, and got him a cooler so they had fruits and vegetables in the front, moved the cigarettes to the back. People started walking more. Up till then, that neighborhood was so tough that the police officers, 2 police officers would go with another 2 police officers. So you had pairs walking in pairs. That's a tough neighborhood. And police keep a very good record of crime statistics. Crime went way down, people started walking, store did well, high school kids and parents were happy. So that's a built environment that was changed. Southwest Florida, normally we have an outdoor, wonderful place that the last couple of days, a little exceptional. But you get the picture. Just where you live matters. And you can have places, and I'm thinking of Jacksonville, Florida, or actually, yeah, Jacksonville, Florida is a good example. On one side of a small river, literally, probably, you know, throw a golf, hit a golf ball across the river. One side has a life expectancy to the other side, a discrepancy of about 10 years. So obviously the same atmosphere, same everything else, but it's just a hugely different area. You take areas that were redlined for years and years. Redlines when the banks post-World War II didn't loan, were concerned about the getting the loans repaid, so they didn't loan to certain areas. So those areas became decrepit, and it built on itself, so they got multi-generational despair, basically, learned helplessness. So they got to break that cycle. So those are all sorts of things that can be done. Once they're recognized, once you make the diagnosis, then you start the therapy and things can change. So the environment matters. And even changing the environment here, and you still, the architect here was brilliant, that leaving the railroad tracks coming through brings back a nostalgia that, you know, makes the point of what this place was a convener for travel at that time, of transportation. Now it's a travel for intellectual pursuit and changing the world. So the environment matters. We all know that, and just a question of getting everybody's environment. So one last or similar comment. What has happened in America today is that we're losing the middle class. It's a big problem. So 1% of the wealthiest people own 50% of the total net worth of the country. So it's hugely centralized. And the bottom, about 30%, there's no net worth left for them. So you get this huge disparity, and that's happened in other countries. Internationally, when that happens, you get clashes, political, physical, and it makes it unpleasant for the wealthy people and the poor people. So rebuilding the middle class is a big deal. So getting an environment where people can walk, live, and play, and their kids are safe walking to school or whatever is appropriate makes a huge difference. If you look at the amount of research, and this is a New England Journal of Medicine article back 2015, 2016, we spend 90% of the research dollars spent in the country today are for personalized medicine and high-end ways of helping people with end-stage disease. We spend only 10% on prevention. So you take your environmental engineers and architects and you change it to a walking environment, a complete street, you'll make a hugely different outcome for well over 80% of the diseases that we're dealing with. That makes a big difference. People coming into downtown areas, we use Philadelphia as an example, very narrow streets because it was built in the revolutionary times. So they've got to figure out how to make those streets safe for everybody. Meanwhile, if you have the cars overrun it, you can't even get the traffic to it. Interesting enough, Tampa, in certain areas of old Tampa, they've got the same problem, which is a concern. Some smart planner will figure out what to do.
Well, thank you for those comments. We have some very impactful developers in the room that are helping to shape Southwest Florida. So your comments are very much appreciated. And we talked about loneliness, right? So never mind the healthfulness of being able to walk or bike, but how about when you walk by your neighbor and you connect and you say hi? So that's very, very important.
Yeah, so I'm gonna just bullet point this, but I think of three architectures, and I think they're all important in terms of health, critically important. One is the physical architecture, and to that point, I remember interviewing Dan Ariely, who's one of the greatest behavioral economists of our time, written multiple best-selling books, and he was a professor at Duke at the time, and I said, what's the one biggest factor in healthy behavior change? He didn't even stop to think. He just said architecture, your environment, the physical state of what's around you, whether it's safe to walk outside, do you have windows in the building, et cetera. That's he just flat out, that is the single most powerful behavioral change, healthful thing you could do is change the physical environment, physical architecture. The second is psychological architecture. Now, I talked about social media before, the vast majority of the folks who created the social media, Facebook and others, the vast majority of them took one course at Stanford. And that course was taught by a professor named B.J. Fogg. And B.J. was a psychology professor, but then he shifted in technology and became psychology technologist. He made up this field. And he taught this course where he taught the founders, literally, of all the largest social media companies, including the Googles, et cetera. He taught them how to insert psychological architecture into the technology. And they'll freely admit this. They talk about it publicly. Oh yeah, of course I took BJ's course. Where else would I have learned how to do this? The most powerful behavioral change and the largest, most scale behavioral change things we've ever seen are social media, right? They could literally start wars. They can change economies. And fake news, right? Politics. So this psychological architecture is important. It's important, and if you actually think about it for a moment, and think about when you listen to athletes talk, high-performing athletes, when you listen to high performers of any musicians, actors, when you listen to them talk, what do they talk about in terms of their art? They talk about the psychological architecture, what you have to do in your mind, what you have to build in order to sustain what you're doing to be that high performer. So physical architecture, psychological, and the final one is something I learned from a professor from Harvard, his name is Christakis. And years ago, he wrote about this effect you were talking about what you do is not something you make up on your own. What you do is what you see others around you doing. And so if you smoke, chances are that you have a first or second or even third degree acquaintance that smokes. If you drink, same thing. If you go to the gym, it's likely that the people around you, that's where you pick that up from. And there's this is decades of scientific research to show that it is one of the most powerful. And so this I would call relational architecture. So the physical architecture, and again, you can go home and you can actually, again, do something about that. The psychological architecture, and I'll give you one example just to end this. And third, the relational architecture, which again, you can go, if I want to go work out, what do I do? And literally, I'm not kidding you, what do? I go to my friends or their friends, or who actually work out. I do CrossFit now. The only reason I'm doing, I hate it. I hate it almost as much as I hate meditation. I literally, every morning I wake up and there's the same voice in me that says, don't do that again, don't go to that building. And I go, and I do it because I had a third degree friend, not even my friend, not even his friend, but his friend's friend, who was a crazy CrossFit and convinced me at a party to start CrossFit. That's the power of the relational architecture. The physical and psychological, what do I do to get out of the house? And I have to do this. This is now incorporating the first two in one event. I have my gym clothes literally it's folded and ready. So I don't even have to, it's like Spider-Man or something. I just literally get into my suit in the morning. I don't stop to think because God forbid, if I stopped to think, I would go back into bed. So do you see those three and how important they are?
Please, if you don't mind, will you take us very quickly through the power of belief? Is that where you were going?
Exactly where
Neuro pathways, bring me there.
One of the other, I didn't mention, one of the other pieces I have, I'm a Neural Change Solutions consultant, which is the material of Dr. Joe Dispenza that we bring into businesses and organizations, and now we're actually doing a lot of work with veterans. So I have the pleasure of having colleagues that are doing work within healthcare, with veterans, with the Lakota tribe, and it's making a huge difference. And it's actually number 2 that, if I may, I would move up to number 1. Because the psychological architecture component, the beliefs, the programs that we have, by the time we're 35 years old, 95% of our thoughts and actions are pre-programmed. They're already a part of who we are, and we're subconscious to them. There's only 5% that we're conscious to. And if you think about wanting to make a change, so going to the gym and that voice that you hear, and if I can play with it a second, that's okay. That voice that you hear is that voice that comes from some belief or programming previously experienced that you may not even be aware of, most likely subconscious. Asking yourself where that comes from, which is important, but not as important as what would you rather be. Identifying the belief, the program, as it exists currently in this psychology, and then looking at opportunity to make a change. You have a choice. You can choose not to make a change. I've had experiences where that joy that I was feeling wasn't there. I chose to feel anger, and that anger set me on the couch for 5 hours. It was some of the most unproductive time I've ever had in my life. And there were physical repercussions to that that went on 2 days beyond that. We have the choice, and in making that choice, we have the opportunity to change the program and the belief systems that are pre-programmed subconsciously into the being that we are. And in making that choice, we then can change some of the behaviors. So we are the things that we think, the way that we act, our experiences. And if we want to make a change, we have to get to the root of what those things are, which are based on those beliefs and the pre-programming that we have. Changing that pre-programming, changing those beliefs, allows us to make changes physically and psychologically in our lives that literally change the life that we lead. If you were to say to me 10 years ago that I would be sitting here having a conversation around meditation and changing practice and heart coherence and brain coherence, I would have laughed at you. And then suddenly I discovered the science of gratitude, and I moved in the direction of gratitude being one of those practices that has been talked about. There's a lot of apps and programs around it, but then are you truly experiencing gratitude? If you think about being thankful to being appreciative to being grateful, and the change in the frequency as you demonstrate those emotional states, and what it means, first and foremost, to be thankful for whatever that is happening externally to you, and then being appreciative where you may have some reciprocal effect around appreciation, but then truly being grateful for things that are outside of you. And what that means for your experience within this life, it completely changes the game of what your experience of this life can be. And so that for me was an exercise in my own belief system and programming, because I had a whole lot of programs around not being successful, not being grateful, not being worthy. And all of those were opportunity for me to take a look at how do I change the way in which I think about these things. And based on my making those changes, now I wake up every day and having the experience that I couldn't have dreamed of in regard to what I do and who I get to work with and the people that I talk to, including some of the research that I get to do in regard to individuals and these belief systems, the programs, and how we as individuals can make changes to them.
Yeah, so we've just come full circle, and I'm very sad that we're coming to the end of this hour and a half together. I'd like you to comment on reframing. Kevin, can you repeat the stat for me? And I want all of you to comment on reframing. Repeat the stat for me, please, on how much of our experience is based on our subconscious mind.
By the time we're 35 years old, 95% of what we think and act is subconsciously programmed.
So as an individual takeaway for this afternoon, maybe we think about, in my reality, in my experience, in my life, 95% of what I'm choosing to experience is based on subconscious thinking that was created before I was 35. Is that not an opening? So I was making myself sick, okay, by being in constant fight or flight from pathways of thinking that were established in my youth. So I was eating great, I lived in the right zip code, I was working out, I had a great job, I had great friends, I had a beautiful marriage, and I was severely sick, and no one could diagnose me. And I discovered that it was my mind that was blowing up my autoimmune system. I was in perpetual fight or flight. So one takeaway as an individual for your health is, do you know your purpose? Are you looking at what your truth is? Do you want to take a moment and meditate and maybe have a new thought? So we're inviting you at Collaboratory in partnership with Edison Awards to disrupt your pattern of thinking. And as a community, instead of me coming up here in 2-5 years reading stats that are continuing on the decline, after we're spending tens of millions of dollars donating to try to solve for them. We're inviting you into a conversation about reframing. Are we asking the right questions, right? How are we looking at things? So unfortunately, I would like us to close, because I have so many more questions I want to ask you, but I'd like us to close with the opportunity to look at how can we look at things different, either as an individual, as a region, or as a globe.
So as individuals, we all know what to do, pretty much. It's not a secret. It's just a question of starting small, start a little habit, something that's doable. Don't put a goal that's not achievable, but get some momentum going. And then, as a community, grab a neighbor, grab a friend, grab a nearby relative, and spread those good things. This is not rocket science. I mean, this is going back to Dr. Spock and everything else. And then finally, as a region, we should be an example for the rest of the country and the rest of the world. There's a reason Florida is now the fastest growing state. For a long while, Florida was, and Texas was for many years. Now Florida is again. West coast of Florida is the fastest growing area in Florida. I think we have about 4,000 people a day moving to Florida. It's remarkable. But why not be an example for the rest of the country? And our country can and should be an example for the rest of the world.
Oh, good stuff.
Yeah, I'm gonna, I guess, repeat myself here, but I think the most, for me right now, where I am, the most helpful thing is trying to figure out how to protect myself and find time each day to listen to myself. And you know, to your point, it's just to, I think through that it really is, there's no other way you can begin to reframe and recreate your psychological architecture unless you actually listen to yourself. And then one other point, which is, you know, our society, we're so inculcated in how we think, you know, and one of the things that we're all trained to do is give answers, right? From, you know, you don't even have to get to 35. You know that, you know, if you want to make it through grade school, and high school, you know, and college, you better have the answers. And so we're taught to give these rote answers. I think that questions are the new answers. And I would like to see better questions, more meaningful questions, more purposeful questions being asked by myself and by others, as opposed to thinking, and again, we've been brainwashed. Got to have the answer, got to get right to the answer, got to get going, right? And we pass, you know, through that sort of stage of, well, are we asking the right questions? If we're not asking the right questions, we're in big, big trouble, because no answer is going to be the right answer, right?
I would say be present. Depression comes from our reviewing our history or the history. Anxiety comes from our taking that history and applying it to the future. But when we're present, it gives us the opportunity to do exactly what you're talking about in reflection and identify a different way, make a different choice, have a different experience, and then feel something differently. So that would be my piece.
Beautiful. Thank you for weathering the storm to be here today. Thank you to the Edison Awards and Collaboratory for hosting this delicious conversation. Thank you to Studio Plus, but most importantly, thank you guys for taking a couple hours out of this rainy afternoon to connect with yourselves. And I'm excited to say that we are able to support your journey to rewiring your subconscious thinking to have whatever experience it is that you would like to have by reprogramming those neural pathways, coming together in a shared community. We talked here tonight about shared community. And if you surround yourself with smokers who don't work out, that's what you're gonna do, right? Or if you create a new behavior by connecting with your third removed workout buddy and laying out your clothes, eventually you're going to create that new reality for yourself, that new healthful choice. So for the next hour out in the lobby, we have a couple opportunities for you to support you on your journey. We have the opportunity, you can continue your conversation with Dr. Weiss at the Blue Zones table, and thank you Blue Zones team for being here today. We can celebrate innovation and disruption at the Edison Awards table, so feel free to stop by there. We have a couple dozen books that we brought in Beyond the Walls with Dr. Neuwirth. You can head to his table and connect with him. You can connect with Kevin, who will be at the root cause healing table, where we get into the neurology and heart coherence changes that we can make and support your journey to that. And we also have the collaboratory table, which invites you to plug in to our health and wellness movement. We've got the team from the Health Coalition, and many of you here today are already involved, but you're all invited. Please take this information and share it with others as well. In about 10 days, you will get a copy of this video that we've recorded. I know, right? Isn't that exciting? Thank you, Frank, for clapping. And we're going to share it with you. And our ask to you is that if so inspired, please share it with others. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you again to Studio Plus. Please stop by our tables and drive home safely. Good night. Thank you.